I sat at the bottom of the staircase, the echo of their laughter drifting down like dust I wasn't meant to notice. The family photo I had framed last Christmas now lay face down on the floor, the glass cracked clean through my son's smile. "She belongs in a dumpster," he'd said, loud enough for his wife to laugh, soft enough to pretend I wasn't meant to hear. After raising him alone, after surviving 2 jobs and a collapsed lung just to pay for his education, I was garbage. So I did what trash does. I disappeared and took everything with me. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The chandelier above the dining table cast a soft amber glow over the roasted ham, glazed carrots, and bowls of store-bought cranberry sauce. Marian Cole sat silently at the far end, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her son's home was newer, louder, flashier, all granite countertops and blue LED cabinet lights, but cold in the way money couldn't hide. Diane clinked her wine glass a little too hard and let out a fake laugh that echoed through the open-plan living room. "Well, I told Eric he needs to look into that lakeside property once your situation clears up," she said, eyeing Marian without even a hint of subtlety. Rachel flinched and kept her eyes on her plate. Marian didn't respond. She'd brought a warm peach cobbler, homemade, the same kind Eric used to beg for as a boy, but it still sat untouched at the edge of the counter. Eric leaned back in his chair with the smug ease of someone who thought he'd already won. "Mom," he said, his voice just loud enough to command the room, "we need to talk about you downsizing. This house you're clinging to? It's too much. You've got what? Maybe 5 years left before you're in a wheelchair?" Rachel's fork clattered against her plate. "I mean, come on," he continued, gesturing broadly with his wineglass. "You're barely getting around now. That house should be working for you. Or for us, if we're being honest." Diane snorted into her drink. Eric chuckled, eyes sharp. "Look, I'm not trying to be cruel, but that house, it's not a shrine. It's a 20th century brick box filled with expired meds and doilies. You belong in a condo. Or," he looked at Diane with mock consideration, "maybe something with full-time care. If we're being real, you belong in a damn dumpster." Silence dropped like a stone. Rachel's chair scraped back an inch. She looked at her father in disbelief, blinking like she couldn't believe what she'd just heard. Marian didn't move. Not at first. She reached for her cloth napkin, folded it with slow precision, and placed it gently beside her untouched plate. When she finally stood, her movements were steady, quiet, like someone closing a door that would never be reopened. Eric rolled his eyes. "Oh, come on, Mom. Don't get dramatic. You know I'm just saying what needs to be said." Marian looked at him for a long moment. "You always were fond of the sound of your own voice." She turned to Rachel, offered a small nod, not a goodbye, just a thread of recognition, then walked out, her heels tapping against the imported hardwood floors that had never felt like home. Outside, the night air was colder than she expected. She buttoned her coat with stiff fingers and walked down the driveway without looking back. The peach cobbler stayed behind, forgotten. Alice Munro was waiting on the porch swing when Marian pulled up to her house 20 minutes later. "Well," Alice said, rocking slow, "judging by the thundercloud over your head, I'd say dinner was a bust." Marian didn't answer. She walked past Alice, up the 3 steps, and opened her front door. The warmth of her home hit her like a wave, the smell of lavender polish, old paperbacks, the quiet dignity of a life carefully built. Alice followed, closing the door behind her. "What did the jackass say this time?" Marian exhaled slowly, like releasing a poison she didn't want to carry inside. "He told me I belong in a dumpster." Alice froze, keys still in her hand. "He what?" Marian didn't flinch. She just walked into the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water. And they all sat there, laughing, like I was some inconvenience they couldn't wait to bury. Alice set her purse down, jaw tight. "They don't know what you're capable of." Marian sipped, then set the glass down with perfect control. "No," she said softly, "but they're going to find out." She turned to face her friend fully now, her spine straight, her voice iron, "And I hope they choke on the surprise." The next morning, Marian Cole sat at her kitchen table beneath the soft hum of the overhead light, a thick black binder open in front of her. The house was still, No television, no radio, just the ticking of the antique wall clock and the soft creak of the old oak chair beneath her. She turned each page deliberately, as if excavating history one transaction at a time. Utility bills, notarized copies of personal loans, Christmas cards stuffed with folded checks, and receipts, so many receipts, signed by Eric in thick black ink. $8,000 for his landscaping business, $3,200 for Diane's SUV down payment, $5,000 just to get them through a rough month. She had never asked for repayment, just a phone call, a thank you, respect. She closed the binder and reached for a second one, a thicker, older book with faded plastic sleeves. Inside were documents she hadn't touched in years, the deed to the house, a yellowed bank passbook from a credit union that no longer existed, her late husband's discharge papers from the Navy, and a handwritten will they had drafted on lined notebook paper in 1982. All of it was in her name: the house, the land, the savings, every dollar she had built through night shifts, double shifts, and skipped vacations while Eric chased half-baked business ideas and made excuses. Across from her, Rachel sat in silence, elbows on the table, eyes scanning the loan entries with disbelief hardening into fury. "He never paid back a cent," Rachel said, voice low. "No," Marian replied, not bitter, just factual. Rachel closed the binder and leaned back. "Grandma, you don't deserve this." Marian looked up, her eyes tired but sharp. "Deserves got nothing to do with it. I allowed it." Rachel frowned. "You were being generous. That's not the same." Marian offered a tight smile. "Generosity isn't kindness when it teaches someone how to be cruel." There was a long pause. Then Alice appeared in the doorway, carrying a cardboard box labeled Tax Years 2004 to 2011. "Found more in the attic. Girl, you kept receipts like the FBI was coming." Marian nodded toward the table. "I think the day has come." Alice dropped the box beside the others and peered at the mound of paperwork like a general inspecting a battlefield. "You've got enough to bury him in debt alone." "I don't want to bury him," Marian said. "I want to erase him." Alice raised an eyebrow, impressed. "Now that's a quote." Rachel smiled faintly, then sobered. "What do we do first?" Alice pulled a chair closer. "The best punishment," she said, tapping the stack of documents, "is ink on paper. Forget revenge. Go legal. Go clean." Marian's hand hovered over a leather-bound address book. She flipped to the R section and dialed the number from memory. 3 rings. Then a crisp male voice answered. "Richard Hale speaking." Marian took a breath. Her voice was calm, composed, almost too casual. "Richard, it's Marian Cole. I'd like to schedule an appointment." A pause. Then, "Well, hello, Marian. You calling about that estate planning review I kept bugging you about?" She looked out the kitchen window. The backyard was still damp from the morning rain, the oak tree casting long shadows over the garden. "Yes," she said. "It's time." "Same beneficiaries?" he asked. "I can just update the numbers." There was a weighty pause. "No," Marian said clearly. "This isn't just numbers. I want to change my heir." Another pause, this time longer. "Understood," Richard said. "I'll clear my afternoon." Marian hung up the phone. The room was silent again, but something electric passed between the 3 women. Rachel leaned forward. "Grandma, are you sure about this?" Marian placed both hands flat on the table. "Eric's made it clear what I'm worth to him." She looked to the binder. "The receipts, the history. It's time I return the favor. In full." The bell above the diner door gave its usual half-hearted jingle as Marian stepped inside. A gust of wind chased her in, flapping the edges of her trench coat. The place was old, the kind that still served meatloaf on Wednesdays, and hadn't changed the wallpaper since '87, but it was clean, and more importantly, it was private on weekday afternoons. She scanned the booths and spotted him near the back. Frank Dwyer, broad-shouldered, weathered, still wearing the work boots and worn denim jacket that had become his signature, even after he'd made his second million. A construction man through and through, but sharper than people realized. Sharp enough to have once trusted Eric Cole, foolish enough to have paid for it. Frank looked up when she approached, confusion flickering across his face before he stood. "Marian? I didn't expect—" "You look well, Frank," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "Thanks," he said, slowly sitting. "Can't say the same for Cleveland traffic." "What's this about?" I thought you and I were, well, civil, not social. Marion folded her hands on the table. This isn't social. Frank blinked. All right. The waitress came over, poured them coffee without asking. She knew better than to linger. Marion took a sip before speaking. I need to talk to you about Eric. Frank froze mid-reach for the sugar. His eyes narrowed slightly, the easy charm draining from his face. What about him? He threw me away, Marion said, evenly. Humiliated me. Mocked everything I've built. He thinks I'm already in the ground, just waiting to hand him the keys to my life. Frank laughed once. Not a happy sound. Yeah, that sounds like him. She reached into her purse and slid a folded copy of a notarized document across the table. This is a preliminary transfer of trust instruments. It's not finalized yet, but it can be. Frank stared at it, then back at her. You're serious. Dead serious, she said. The house, the accounts, the land, everything he thinks he's inheriting. I want it to go to someone who will know exactly what that will do to him. Frank leaned back, staring at her like he'd never quite seen her before. Then he gave a soft whistle. He ruined me once, Marion. Took everything I had in that partnership. Walked away clean. Left me to eat the lawsuits. I remember, she said. And I also remember you never raised your voice about it. I raised fists, Frank said with a grin. Just not in court. Marion's expression didn't change. Would you take it? If I signed it over to you? He looked down at the paper again, then shook his head slowly. Hell, I don't know if this is a gift or a bomb. It's both, Marion said. He took my dignity. I want him to watch me give it away. To the man who'll never forget what he did. Frank exhaled through his nose, rubbed a hand over his face. You sure you want this kind of war? I've already had the war, she said. Now I'm just choosing the battlefield. A quiet voice cut in from behind the booth. She's not alone. They turned. Rachel stood there. Messenger bag slung over one shoulder, earbuds looped around her neck. She looked calm, resolved. I asked her to let me come, Rachel said to Marianne. I wanted to see this. I wanted to remember it. Frank looked from granddaughter to grandmother. She always this composed? Marianne smiled faintly. She's better than I ever was. Rachel nodded once. Eric deserves worse. But this'll do. Frank tapped the paper on the table. All right then. Let's burn the world. Later that evening, in the golden quiet of Richard Hale's office, Marian sat across from the estate attorney as he reviewed her revised will, glasses perched low on his nose. Beneficiary to be changed from Eric Cole to Frank Dwyer. Rachel Cole as backup contingent, assets to be transferred under sealed trust in the event of early medical incapacitation. He looked up. You understand what this means? Marian nodded. I do. Richard tapped his pen twice on the table. All right, he said. Let's change everything. 2 weeks later, the conference room smelled like lemon polish and old law books. Papers rustled softly as Richard Hale slid the finalized will across the oak table toward Marian. His gold-rimmed glasses caught the overhead light, casting small surgical glints across his weathered features. No second chances after this, he said, tapping the signature line. Once we notarize, this replaces everything. Eric's out. Frank's in. Marian didn't hesitate. She signed her name slowly but firmly, her hand steady as stone. Every letter was deliberate, her pen slicing through years of silence and swallowed pain. Alice Munro sat beside her, jaw clenched with satisfaction. Dated, witness, all legal, she muttered, clicking her pen like a gavel. I'll get the notary seal. She pulled a small leather pouch from her purse, unfolded the content, and pressed the embossed stamp down with satisfying finality. The metallic snap echoed in the room. Rachel stood across the table, holding her phone carefully upright. You're on video, Grandma. Time-stamped, geotagged, audio recorded. Good, Marian said, smoothing the edge of the paper with one finger. Let him try to claim otherwise. Alice chuckled. This ain't just legally binding, this is digitally bulletproof. Marian leaned back and looked out the window. Cleveland's gray skyline loomed in the distance, the courthouse spires poking through the haze. Her chest felt tight, but not with doubt. It was the quiet tension that came before the fall of a match, the last still moment before everything caught fire. Now, she said softly, let's finish it. Richard nodded and pushed a second folder forward. Trust accounts, bank reassignments, insurance updates, transfer of beneficiary rights and distribution clauses. You want everything moved under the Dwyer Trust, with Rachel as successor? Yes, Marian said. Alice read over the fine print. We're making history, sweetheart. More like rewriting it, Marian replied. She signed again. And again. Every signature struck a match. Every date stamped a new beginning. Across town, Eric Cole stood poolside, drink in hand, live streaming to his followers. Just got off the phone with a property consultant, he said to the camera, aviators reflecting his manicured lawn. Lakeside cabin might be in the cards once the estate clears. Gotta prep, you know? That inheritance ain't gonna spend itself. Diane appeared behind him in a crisp white romper, oversized sunglasses covering half her face. She sipped from a mimosa and smiled thinly. Once she's gone, we'll live big. Finally. Eric smirked. She doesn't need that house. She doesn't need any of it. And she knows it. He ended the stream and leaned back in his chair, blissfully ignorant that the house he'd just called his had already slipped through his fingers. That evening, Marian sat in her living room, her favorite cardigan draped over her shoulders, sipping chamomile tea. Alice and Rachel were with her, the air still crackling with the tension of what they'd just done. Do you feel different? Rachel asked. Marian considered the question. I feel lighter, she said. Like I just unloaded a freight train. Alice raised her mug. To lightness and to legacy. Marian didn't smile, but her eyes softened. Eric always believed blood was enough, that he was entitled. He was wrong, Rachel said. Family doesn't come from blood. It comes from behavior. There was a pause, heavy with shared understanding. Then Marian stood and walked to the small lockbox in the hallway closet. From it, she withdrew an envelope, plain white, sealed with her initials, and placed it in Rachel's hands. If anything happens to me, she said quietly, you give this to Richard. It's my letter of intent. For court. If he contests. Rachel held it carefully, as if it might burn. He won't see it coming. No, Marian said, looking past her granddaughter to the dark window. But he will see the door close behind him. The knock on Marian's door was sharp. Not rushed, not hesitant, but sharp. The way someone knocks when they think they have leverage. She opened it to find Eric standing there in a navy quarter zip and khakis too tight across the waist. He had sunglasses perched on his head, and the grin of a man who thought charm still worked on the woman who raised him. Hey ma, he said, stepping in without waiting for permission. Got a sec? Marian closed the door behind him with deliberate calm. Not really, but you're already here. He made himself at home on her sofa like it belonged to him. His eyes scanned the living room with thinly veiled calculation, every antique photo, every polished wooden surface, like he was already moving in. I've been thinking, he said, clasping his hands together. You're not getting any younger, and I've got some things I need to line up financially. Some investments, some upgrades. Nothing wild, just future planning. Marian stood across from him, arms folded. Eric cleared his throat. What I'm saying is, maybe it's time we start the inheritance conversation, like liquidating certain assets early. House, account distribution, keeps things clean. Less court hassle later. No, Marian said. The word hit like a slap. Eric blinked, caught off guard. I mean, we don't have to… Wait, what? I said no, Marian repeated. Nothing is being distributed early. Not the house, not the accounts, nothing. Eric's smile vanished. You're kidding. Marian walked past him and picked up a folded quilt from the armchair, straightening its edges. You think you're entitled to what I built while you were skipping rent and defaulting on credit cards? You're being paranoid, Eric snapped. You've been holed up here with Alice and Rachel whispering like some damn coven. Behind him, Rachel's voice cut in. You're being recorded. Eric turned. Rachel stood at the edge of the hallway, phone in hand, screen blinking red. I just wanted a record, she said coolly. For when you start yelling. Eric pointed at her, face darkening. You little brat. You think you're better than me just because Grandma never saw through your fake little saint act? Marian stepped between them. Leave. He hesitated, then scoffed. You know what? Fine. But don't come begging when you're drooling into a pillow and can't remember your own name. He shoved open the front door. Don't wait too long, Ma, he spat. The world doesn't owe you immortality. The screen door clapped shut behind him. That night, Alice sat at the kitchen table with Marian and Rachel, watching the video on Rachel's phone. That's it, Alice said, nodding. That's the matchstick. You've got voice, tone, threats, and aggression. That boy just handed us a court exhibit on a silver platter. Marion pulled a folder from the cabinet and placed it on the table. Inside were the documented loans, everyone she had reviewed weeks before. I want to file, she said, for all of it, principal, interest, statutes still open. Alice's smile was all teeth. Now that's the Marion I remember. 2 days later, Eric was served at his office, a sterile shared workspace with exposed pipes and fake plants. A courier in a blue windbreaker handed him the manila envelope in front of 3 startled interns. Eric tore it open, eyes narrowing at the bold letters. Notice of debt collection. Marion Cole, 5, Eric Cole. He crumpled the paper, face burning. Diane later found him pacing in their kitchen, pacing hard, chewing on his thumbnail. She's suing me, he said, for loans, from years ago. Diane poured a glass of wine, unfazed. Can she even do that? She can if she has receipts, he growled, which apparently she does. Diane raised an eyebrow. What about just contesting the will? You said she's slipping. Maybe you can flip this. Eric froze mid-step. A slow, calculating expression crept onto his face. She's old, alone, easily influenced. Diane nodded. Say she's mentally unfit. File for guardianship. 3 days later, Marion received the envelope. Rachel opened it, read the contents twice, then handed it over wordlessly. Marion read it once. Petition for legal guardianship. Marion Cole. Filed by Eric Cole. Her hand didn't shake, but her eyes hardened. Alice stood in the doorway behind her. He just declared war. Marion folded the papers, voice calm as stone. Then we'll give him a courtroom funeral. The courtroom smelled faintly of varnished wood and stale coffee. Marion sat at the petitioner's table in a charcoal wool coat, her hair pulled into a soft twist, silver glinting like steel under the fluorescent. Beside her, Richard Hale flipped quietly through a leather-bound case file, unbothered, as though this were just another probate matter. It wasn't. Across the aisle, Eric lounged with the same smug detachment he wore at family dinners, now in a tailored suit that didn't quite mask the nervous tapping of his heel. Diane sat behind him, arms crossed, expression blank. She was dressed like a country club widow already counting the casket flowers. Judge Morrison entered without preamble, late 60s, silver bob, reading glasses halfway down her nose, robe crisp and spine stiffer. She settled behind the bench, eyes sweeping the courtroom like she'd seen this game before. Because she had. Let's begin, she said. Mr. Cole, you filed for emergency guardianship over your mother, Marion Cole, age 72. On what grounds? Eric rose with a careful solemnity, placing a hand on the wooden rail. Your Honor, I love my mother, but she's become increasingly erratic. She's being manipulated by people who don't have her best interests at heart. I'm concerned she's making decisions she doesn't fully understand, financial decisions that could devastate her estate. He paused for effect. I fear she's no longer mentally competent. A quiet murmur ran through the gallery. Frank Dwyer, sitting in the back row in a collared work shirt and blazer, crossed his arms and leaned back with a half smile. Judge Morrison turned to Richard. Response? Richard stood smoothly. Your Honor, we anticipated this motion. As of 2 weeks ago, Ms. Cole underwent a full cognitive assessment at Cleveland Memorial Hospital. Signed, sealed, and evaluated by 2 independent geriatric psychologists. Handed the folder to the bailiff. The results show perfect cognitive health. No signs of dementia. No mental impairment. Sharp as a tack. Her doctor's words. Eric's face darkened slightly, but he kept his posture. Richard wasn't done. Additionally, the people Mr. Cole refers to as bad influences are her longtime best friend and her granddaughter, neither of whom have any financial interest in Ms. Cole's estate, unless Mr. Cole's own claim is removed. Judge Morrison flipped through the report, nodding faintly. And, Richard continued, gesturing toward the witness stand, we have someone prepared to testify on this matter. Rachel rose. She moved with quiet certainty, backpack slung at her feet as she took the oath. Her voice was calm, steady. I've watched my dad insult, belittle, and manipulate my grandmother for years, she said. He treats her like she's in the way. Like her house, her money, and her life are his to collect whenever he's ready. This isn't about her safety, it's about control. About getting what he thinks he's owed. Eric shot up. She's lying. Sit down. Judge Morrison snapped without looking at him. Rachel's eyes didn't waver. She's more lucid than anyone I know. She still corrects my grammar. And last week she beat me at Scrabble. Twice. That got a chuckle from the gallery. Even the court reporter stifled a grin. Judge Morrison closed the file, removed her glasses, and looked straight at Eric. You filed a baseless guardianship petition against a woman with a flawless medical record in apparent retaliation for a legal debt claim and a rewritten will. That's not concern, Mr. Cole. That's coercion. Eric opened his mouth. Another word, she said flatly, and I'll hold you in contempt. The silence after that was deafening. Judge Morrison banged her gavel once. Petition denied. Case dismissed. Outside the courthouse, Marian descended the steps slowly, dignity intact, breath visible in the late winter air. Cameras weren't there, but Frank was. He leaned against the passenger side of his truck, arms folded, watching Eric storm down the sidewalk 10 feet ahead, muttering curses into the wind. Didn't even flinch in there, Frank said as Marian approached. Why would I? She replied. I wasn't the one pretending to be a son. Frank opened the truck door for her. You want to grab pie? She nodded once. Make it cherry. I'm in the mood for sweet things done right. As the truck pulled away from the courthouse curb, Rachel lagged behind, phone in hand, eyes fixed on a new alert. She caught up to them at the crosswalk, voice sharp. Grandma, you're not going to believe what Eric just posted. Marian turned. What now? Rachel turned the screen around. It was a video. Eric, red-faced, ranting, accusing Marian of being coached, claiming the judge was bought, and swearing to expose the fraud. Let him dig, Marian said coolly. Eventually, he'll hit the bottom. It started with a paper trail. Rachel sat cross-legged on the carpet in Marian's study, sorting through a battered accordion folder filled with documents Marian hadn't touched in years. Old bank statement, pension correspondent, renewal notices from a half-dozen insurance companies. Then she saw it, tucked between 2 letters from AARP, a life insurance policy. The issue date stopped her cold. 4 months ago. It wasn't Marian's handwriting on the application, it was Eric's. The listed beneficiary? Eric Cole? Primary. No secondary. Rachel sat back, her pulse thudding in her ears. The signature at the bottom was a slanted mess. Marian's name forged with just enough effort to fool someone not paying attention. She scanned it. Premiums already paid. Payout clause, active. Policy quietly humming in the background of Marian's life, waiting for her to die. You're sure it's not one of the old ones? Alice asked, flipping the paper toward the light. Rachel nodded. The date's recent. Look at the signature. It's not even close. He submitted it with an email under a fake address. I tracked the domain. It's linked to his company. Marian took the document slowly, stared at it. Her hands were steady, but her jaw locked. The betrayal sat differently this time, not like humiliation or insult. This was premeditated, cold. She laid the policy flat on the table like it was a weapon. He thought no one would find this. Alice folded her arms. He just dug his own grave. Marian reached for her phone. Get Richard. At Hale and Associate, Richard didn't sit behind his desk. He stood, arms folded, lips pressed into a flat line as he scanned the insurance form. This crosses a very different line, he said finally. If you give me permission, I can file for a full financial injunction. It'll freeze his ability to take out any financial instruments tied to your identity, accounts, insurance, loans, everything. It also becomes admissible in any future court motion. Do it, Marian said. Marian, Richard said gently, if this policy had gone unnoticed and something had happened to you. Marian looked him straight in the eye. Then I'd be dead, and he'd be rich. She paused. But now I'm just angry and awake. The next morning, Richard filed the injunction, and Marian filed something else, an updated restraining order. The form felt heavier in her hands than she expected, not out of fear, out of sorrow. The same fingers that once bandaged scraped knees now signed legal declarations to keep her son away. As she signed, Alice muttered, He doesn't see it. Not yet. But this is where his life starts to fall apart. Rachel returned from the courthouse clerk's desk, holding up a copy of the stamped motion, filed, logged, and ready for enforcement. Judge Morrison's clerk fast-tracked it. Marian exhaled. Let him try to talk his way out of forgery. But Eric did try. 2 days later, Richard's office received a furious voicemail from Eric, denying everything. You people are insane, his voice barked through the speaker. I never signed anything like that. This is some kind of setup. You're gonna hear from my lawyers. Richard simply tapped the delete button. Meanwhile, Diane stood at the kitchen counter, arms crossed as Eric paced the living room like a caged dog. Did you really forge the policy? She asked, voice flat. Eric wheeled on her. Not forge. It's a placeholder. Legal gray area. Everyone does it. You signed her name. I typed her name. He snapped. There's a difference. Not to a judge. Eric glared at her. Whose side are you on? I'm on the side that doesn't end up in jail. That evening, Marion stood in her driveway, watching the streetlights flicker on. Rachel joined her in silence. I raised him better, Marion said finally. Rachel didn't say anything, because it wasn't true. The knock at Eric's door came early. Too early for someone who had stayed up all night crafting a Facebook rant about family betrayal and legal manipulation. Diane opened it wearing her satin robe and no makeup, expecting a delivery. Instead, she found two federal investigators standing on the porch. Eric Cole? One asked, flipping open a badge. Eric appeared behind her, barefoot and hungover, his voice raspy. What's this about? Mr. Cole, we're conducting a formal inquiry into financial misconduct involving multiple forged documents, joint account misuse, and fraudulent insurance filing. We need to speak with you, voluntarily, for now. Diane's hand flew to her mouth. Eric, what the hell is going on? He blinked, jaw slack. Wait, what? The agents were already stepping inside. 3 hours later, Rachel sat at Marion's kitchen table, laptop open, reading from the public filing report just posted online. They found multiple forged documents tied to your old shared savings account, she said. Withdrawals going back 3 years. He signed your name on at least 5. Alice sipped her coffee like it was champagne. Idiot didn't even try to cover his tracks. Rachel nodded. They subpoenaed the bank's internal records. There are security cam timestamps. One shows him withdrawing funds after he told Diane they were gifted by you. Another shows him depositing money into an LLC that doesn't exist anymore. Marion stirred her tea, calm as a lake. Alice grinned. You okay? Of course, Marion said. Trash exposes itself. Eventually, she stood, walked over to the window and looked out at her garden, everything still and green, untouched by the chaos unraveling across town. Rachel leaned back, arms crossed. Grandma, you're winning. Marion didn't smile, but her reflection in the glass looked 10 years younger. Diane wasn't handling it nearly as well. I have clients, she hissed, pacing the bedroom. I have brand deals, Eric. And now there's a headline with your damn face next to the word fraud. Eric sat on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at his phone. The messages were coming faster now, friends ghosting him, former co-workers liking shady tweets. Even his golf group chat had gone silent. This is temporary, he muttered. It's all just drama, smoke. They have footage, Diane snapped. They have statements. You signed her name. Eric slammed the phone down. She pushed me into this. Diane's mouth tightened. She didn't push you to drain her account. Eric looked away. For the first time in their marriage, Diane didn't yell. She just turned around, walked to the dresser, and began packing a suitcase. That night, Frank Dwyer pulled up to Marion's house in his old Chevy. The porch light was on. She was already waiting outside. He handed her a manila envelope. Had my guy pull the original business partnership contracts, just in case. Marion took it, eyebrows raised. You're sure you want to get involved this deep? Frank shrugged. Eric didn't just betray you. He stole years of my life, too. If I get to return the favor and wear a tie I call that healing. Marion chuckled softly. Therapeutic vengeance? Something like that. He leaned against the porch rail, gaze distant. If you need a witness, I'll testify. I'll sit in that courtroom and spell out under oath just what kind of man your son is. She looked at him, something soft breaking through her composure. Thank you. Frank nodded once. We're not done. Not by a mile. Inside, Rachel updated Richard by phone. Yes, sir, she said. Frank's agreed to testify if needed. And Diane, looks like she's halfway out the door. Her sister posted something cryptic on Instagram about betrayal and divorce lawyers. She paused, listening. Then, understood? We'll be ready. She hung up and joined Marion on the porch. It's all unraveling, Rachel said quietly. Marion didn't answer right away. She was watching the horizon, where the last of the daylight was bleeding into violet dusk. Finally, she spoke. Not unraveling. She turned toward Rachel, eyes sharp and focused, just clearing space. The headline hit like a hammer. Lottery Son facing fraud claims in multi-state civil suit. It ran in the Plain Dealer, but by noon it was syndicated everywhere. National finance blogs, Reddit threads, even a morning segment on Cleveland's local Channel 3, where the anchor's eyebrow visibly arched as she read Eric's name. The article didn't hold back. It detailed the forged insurance policy, the frozen accounts, the pending investigations into his consulting company's missing funds, and hinted at an IRS audit already underway. His face, puffy, stunned, pulled from a 2-year-old press release, sat dead center under the headline. A side caption read, "Once a Cleveland Golden Boy, now circling the drain." Marian read it once, then folded the newspaper neatly and set it aside like yesterday's recipe card. She didn't comment, but the faintest smile ghosted her lips. Later that week, Rachel helped her grandmother carry 3 velvet-lined boxes from the upstairs hallway into the living room. Inside were the heirloom items Marian had protected longer than she'd protected her son's ego. Wedding rings, war medals, a 1940s watch with a cracked face that still ticked in stubborn rhythm. "Are we moving these to the vault now?" Rachel asked. Marian nodded. "We are." She had booked a private family trust vault downtown, arranged through Richard Hale. Sealed, temperature-controlled, fireproof. She wanted the things that mattered stored far from the hands that once reached for them like they were owed. As Rachel gently patted the boxes with tissue and packed them into a canvas tote, she glanced at Marian. "You don't have to come with me, Grandma. I've got the access card. I can take care of it." Marian looked up from the list she was double-checking. "I'm not sending my past out the door alone. It deserves better than that." That evening, as the porch light flicked on and wind chattered the bare branches outside, a car rolled up the driveway. Not Diane's, not a courier. It was Eric. He stood there in a wrinkled blazer, eyes sunken, knuckles white as he clutched a manila envelope. The front door camera blinked red above him. Marian had upgraded it last month. Rachel peered out through the curtain, lips tightening. "He's alone." Marian stood from her armchair slowly. She didn't adjust her sweater. Didn't smooth her hair. She walked to the door, unlocked it, and opened it just wide enough to look him in the eye. Eric's face crumpled at the sight of her. "Mom, I need 5 minutes, please." She said nothing. "I've lost everything," he breathed. "The company's gone. Diane's gone. They're freezing accounts. I have nowhere else. I'm not asking for money, I need help. I need you." Marian stared at him in silence, her gaze cutting through the performance. Then, with deliberate calm, she closed the door. The soft click of the deadbolt echoed louder than any argument. Rachel didn't ask what he said. Marian didn't offer it. The next morning, Marian sat at her kitchen table reviewing her Christmas dinner list. Alice raised an eyebrow. "He really showed up last night?" Marian nodded, barely looking up. "Looked like someone finally learned what no sounds like." "You want me to post a sign in the yard? Trespassers will be emotionally destroyed?" Marian chuckled under her breath. "No need. He already knows he's not welcome." Alice took a long sip of coffee. "So, what's the plan for Christmas Eve?" Marian slid an index card across the table. Seat placements. At the end, where Eric once sat in faded pencil, a new name was written in blue ink, Frank Dwyer. Alice stared. "You're inviting Frank?" Marian folded her arms. "Eric said I belonged in a dumpster. I'd rather eat dinner with a man who pulled himself out of one." A beat. Then Alice smiled slowly. "You cold, Marian Cole." "I'm just precise," she said. "Besides, Frank likes prime rib." That night, Marian wrote out the formal invitation by hand. Just one name, one envelope. Rachel watched her seal it and asked quietly, "Will Eric find out?" Marian looked up, her eyes flint. "He'll know," she said. The dining room glowed with soft gold light from the chandelier overhead. Candles flickered along the center of the table, dancing across silverware so polished you could see your reflection in the knife blades. Marian had used the good china, white porcelain rimmed with cobalt and gold, the kind she'd inherited from her mother and only ever brought out for one night a year, Christmas Eve. She moved slowly but with purpose, placing the final sprig of rosemary onto a plate of roasted potatoes, straightening the linen napkins folded into precise fans, every corner tucked, every detail perfect. Order, beauty, intention. She paused at the end of the table. Eric's seat. It had always been his, since he was a child, through teenage tantrums and adulthood arrogance. For decades, that spot had belonged to her only son. Tonight, it belonged to someone else. Frank Dwyer stepped inside from the cold, brushing snow from his coat as he carried in a bottle of red wine. "Is this overkill?" he asked, holding it up. "It says reserve." "I don't know what that actually means." Marion took the bottle with a soft smile. "It means it's earned." She motioned to the head of the table. "That's you tonight." Frank hesitated. "You sure about that?" "I invited you," she said. "That seat's yours now." He nodded and took his place, settling in like a man who understood the weight of it. He glanced around the table, appreciating the detail, the effort, the warmth, the intention behind every inch of it. Rachel floated into the room with a tray of rolls and set them down before sinking into her chair. She looked around once, then beamed. "This feels right." Marion met her granddaughter's eyes. "Yes, it does." Alice raised her glass, already half full. "To chosen family," she declared, "and to women who no longer wait for apologies to move on." Frank lifted his glass with a quiet grin. Rachel laughed, clinked hers gently with Alice's. Marion raised hers last. "To closure," she said softly, "and to peace." Outside, headlights slowed in front of the house. Eric sat behind the wheel of his car, engine humming low. From the street, the windows of the dining room framed the scene like a painting, candlelight glowing against the frost, silhouettes of raised glasses, laughter floating faintly through the glass. He hadn't been invited, hadn't even been acknowledged, and yet, here he was, watching strangers take his place, watching him take his place. Frank. He recognized the shoulders, the jawline, still broad from construction work, still sitting like he owned whatever ground he was on. Eric's knuckles tightened on the steering wheel. He rolled the window down just an inch. He could almost smell the roast, could almost hear the echo of the seat that used to scrape the floor when he pulled it out every year. And then, Frank turned his head slightly. Not enough to meet his eyes, but enough to let Eric know he saw him, knew he was there. Inside, Frank leaned in toward Marion and whispered, "This is sweeter than money." Marion smiled but didn't turn toward the window. She didn't need to. The porch light flicked on. The message was clear. "We see you. And we're still not opening the door." Eric drove off in silence. No music, no talk radio, just the hollow rattle of his own breath in his chest and the realization that some doors don't just close, they lock forever. The courtroom was colder this time. Winter clung to the windows like condensation on a wine glass. Marion sat poised at the respondent's table, wearing a charcoal wool coat buttoned high at the collar. No scarf, no gloves, just restraint and resolve. To her right, Richard Hale laid out a slim black binder, a flash drive, and two notarized affidavits with military precision. Across the aisle, Eric Cole sat next to a new attorney, younger, flashier, and visibly annoyed with his client's whispered interruption. Diane was absent, so was anyone else willing to be seen beside him. Judge Morrison entered promptly and adjusted her glasses with the same unshakable expression she'd worn during the guardianship hearing. "We're here on the matter of Mr. Eric Cole's petition to contest the amended will of Marion Cole," she said, claiming undue influence and diminished capacity. She looked up. "Mr. Hale?" Richard stood with measured calm. "Your Honor, we'll begin with Exhibit A." He handed the bailiff a small flash drive. On the screen beside the bench, a video began to play. Marion sat at Richard's office table, flanked by Rachel and Alice. Her voice rang clear and steady as she reviewed the terms of her estate. Every name, every asset, every choice. No confusion, no hesitation. The camera timestamp glowed in the corner. Rachel panned briefly to her phone's lock screen, verifying GPS and real-time capture. A digital fortress of proof. When the video ended, Judge Morrison nodded once. Next, Rachel was sworn in. She wore a navy dress and a silver bracelet Marion had given her last Christmas. She spoke plainly, voice free of venom but packed with weight. "My father's been emotionally abusive to my grandmother for years," she said. "He insulted her at dinners, mocked her age, dismissed everything she gave him. He saw her as a bank account, not a person." She lifted a printed screenshot from her bag and passed it to the bailiff. "This is from his live stream 3 weeks before she finalized the new will. He literally said, and I quote, 'That house is mine. It's just sitting there like a box of free money.' Eric slumped in his chair, jaw tight. Then Alice took the stand. She didn't bring flair, just facts. I notarized the will, reviewed every signature. She didn't hesitate once. And if we're talking influence, let's talk about Eric's influence. She pulled a folder from her purse, thin but potent. Unpaid loans, forged authorizations, transfer attempts on shared accounts. This isn't a son being left out. It's a con man being found out. Eric stood abruptly. This is character assassination. Sit down, Mr. Cole, Judge Morrison said without looking up. He sat. Richard rose again. Your Honor, Marion Cole wasn't manipulated. She wasn't pressured. She was tired. Tired of watching a man she raised treat her like a burden. So she did what the law allows. She made a decision, a lawful one. And she left her legacy in the hands of someone who earned it. There was a pause. Then, the judge spoke. Petition denied. The will stands as filed. All claims of undue influence are rejected. She looked directly at Eric. You lost her trust, Mr. Cole. And in this court, trust holds more weight than entitlement. Bang. Gavel. Marion stood, smooth as ice, and turned toward the gallery. Frank was there, silent and steady. Rachel behind him, tearful but proud. Alice gave her a small wink. Eric was still seated, dazed. Marion walked past him slowly, then paused just for a moment. You replaced me with dumpsters, she said quietly. So I replaced you with witnesses. Eric didn't reply, because there was nothing left to say. Eric Cole stood in the middle of an empty living room that no longer belonged to him. The blinds were gone. So were the couches, the flat screen, and the crystal liquor decanters Diane once insisted made them look elevated. Only a scuffed hardwood floor remained, stretching out like an indictment. A faint imprint on the wall showed where a gallery of travel photos used to hang. Smiles in Rome, laughs in Napa. None of it real. Diane hadn't said goodbye. She'd just left one morning after the court loss, her SUV packed to the brim, her wedding ring left on top of the dishwasher, like a receipt on an unpaid tab. The utilities were weeks overdue. The car had been towed. The company account was frozen. And somewhere out there, federal agents were combing through his last 4 years of business consulting with the precision of scalpels. The fridge buzzed faintly behind him, but the inside was empty. So was the house. So was he. That night, in a fit of desperation, Eric dialed a number he hadn't called in months. Marion's. The line rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. He waited through the beep, heart pounding harder than he expected. Mom, he said, voice cracked and low. I don't know what you want from me. I know I messed up, but I'm still your son. I'm in trouble. I don't have anyone else. Please. He hesitated, then hung up. The voicemail sat in limbo. The next morning, Rachel sipped her coffee while scrolling through Marion's inbox. Her grandmother had set up full call forwarding and digital permissions a month ago. For clarity and peace of mind, she spotted the voicemail transcript, read it, listened once, deleted it. No comment, no pause. Just one sentence to herself. Under her breath, he chose his words. Marion, later that afternoon, sat on the porch with Alice as the wind rattled the bare branches above them. The sky had that heavy, late winter gray, clouds like low ceilings pressing down on the world. He left another message, Rachel said, stepping out with a folded shawl for her grandmother. I took care of it. Marion nodded. Good. Alice tilted her head. What did he say this time? Same thing he always says, Marion replied. I'm still your son. Alice sipped her tea. Hard to be someone's son when you tried to bury the mother. Marion looked down at the steam rising from her mug. The dumpster, she said slowly, is emptier than he thought. The next day, Frank Dwyer showed up at the house in a beat-up gray tow truck with a crooked grin on his face. Thought you'd like to see my new ride, he said, tossing Marion a set of keys. She raised an eyebrow. What am I looking at? Frank opened the passenger door with a flourish. Inside sat a crumpled registration form. The name on it? Eric Cole. Marion stepped forward, eyeing the dented side panel and the faded bumper sticker that once read, Success is earned. You bought his truck? She asked. Repossessed last week, Frank said. Auctioned off with half his stuff. I got it for a steal. Couldn't resist. Marion let out a dry chuckle. You planning to drive it? Frank smirked. Nah. I'm thinking of letting it rust in my driveway. Maybe plant some flowers in the back. Alice stepped outside just in time to catch the last line. She looked at the truck, then at Frank. Well, she said, looks like revenge has wheels now. Frank winked. Ain't that the truth? Later that night, Eric sat in the corner booth of a 24-hour diner off I-90, nursing a burnt cup of coffee and scrolling through a phone full of ghosted contacts and locked accounts. His bank app wouldn't load. His Venmo was flagged, and under recent calls, every number had a red no answer icon beside it, including hers, especially hers. The sheriff's cruiser idled quietly at the curb while two uniformed deputies moved through the house with calm efficiency. Clipboards, gloves, a plastic bin for valuables, a rolling dolly for furniture. No raised voices, no sympathy. Eviction day. Eric sat hunched on the cracked concrete of the driveway, elbows on his knees, hands tangled in his hair. His gray hoodie was stained and loose at the seams. The knees of his jeans were torn, not by fashion, but by wear. A cardboard box beside him sagged under the weight of random items. A framed golf trophy, tangled phone chargers, a cracked watch, two neckties with fading wine stains. The front door stood wide open behind him, gaping like a wound. From across the street, neighbors watched quietly. A mother with her stroller paused mid-stride. A dog walker slowed, pretending to check his phone. Two teenagers on bikes stopped altogether. The whispers were low, but unmistakable. Is that Eric Cole? Didn't his mom? Karma. Finally. Eric didn't hear them, or maybe he did. But it didn't matter anymore. One of the deputies emerged carrying a box marked Kitchen Fragile. He paused just a moment, glancing at Eric, before loading it into the back of a U-Haul with a sigh. Not judgmental, just tired. Like this wasn't the first man who thought the world owed him something and found out otherwise. At that moment, Marion Cole stood inside her foyer, coat buttoned, keys in hand. The winter sun hit her face through the stained glass window, casting shards of red and amber across her cheekbone. You sure you want to be there for this? Alice asked, standing behind her with her purse slung over one shoulder. Marion nodded. He tried to take everything from me. I won't miss the moment when the last piece gets taken from him. They stepped outside. As Marion's car pulled up to the curb, Rachel held her phone at waist level. Camera recording. Lens steady. She said nothing, just watched. Eric looked up. The color drained from his face as his mother stepped out of the passenger side, coat sharp, eyes sharper. He stood, unsteady, wiping at his face with the sleeve of his hoodie. Mom, please. This isn't who I am. You can stop this. Marion looked at the disheveled man standing in the remnants of his ego. The driveway that once symbolized success now littered with peeling boxes and broken pride. This was always your choice, she said, voice even. You just finally ran out of people to blame. He took a desperate step forward. I made mistakes, Rachel's voice interrupted, calm but pointed. Mistakes are accident. What you did was a blueprint. Eric turned to her, eyes bloodshot. Rachel, I'm your father. She didn't lower the phone. Not in any way that matters. Another box hit the U-Haul bed with a thud. Just then, Frank's truck pulled into view. Same old Chevy. The repoed truck Eric once bragged about rolled past him like a ghost of who he thought he'd be. Frank stepped out, leaned against the hood casually, arms folded. He looked around at the scene, at Eric, at Marion, then said it, clear and steady, like a closing line from a movie. Merry Christmas, Eric. Eric turned away, tears running now, silent but constant. The front door slammed shut behind the last deputy. The keys were handed off to the property manager. And just like that, Eric Cole no longer had a front door to walk through. That evening, back at Marion's home, Richard Hale sat across from her in the study, legal papers spread neatly across the desk. Everything's in order, he said. Rachel remains primary heir, but per your instructions, I've added Frank Dwyer as contingent heir in the event Rachel ever declines or becomes unable to accept. Marion signed with firm, confident strokes. Alice looked up from the corner. You're adopting him into your estate? Marion nodded. Eric thought inheritance was about bloodline. She looked over at Frank, who sat quietly, hands folded. It's about loyalty and character. Frank earned what Eric wasted. Frank looked stunned for just a moment. Then his eyes softened. You don't have to do that. I know, Marion said. Then added, but I want to. As Richard packed his briefcase, Rachel walked in from the hallway and handed her grandmother a mug of tea. What happens next? She asked. Marian stared out the window toward the tree-lined road where snow was just beginning to fall. Now, she said, we live well, and we live free. The room was quiet except for the soft clatter of a fountain pen against crisp parchment. Richard Hale sat at the far end of Marian's dining table, sleeves rolled up, glasses halfway down his nose, as he read the final clause aloud. To be distributed upon death or incapacitation to the primary heir, Rachel Grace Cole. In the event the primary heir cannot serve, all rights and responsibilities transfer to contingent heir, Frank Dwyer. Assets include property, accounts, stocks, heirlooms, and all associated trusts. He looked up, voice firm and final. Shall we sign? Marian nodded, already reaching for the pen. She didn't hesitate this time. Not like years ago, when she signed her first will thinking love was immune to rot. Today, she signed with clarity, with peace. And when she leaned back, folding her hands over her lap, her smile wasn't triumphant, it was calm. Eric left me nothing, she said softly. But reason. Alice leaned back in her chair, exhaling like she'd been holding her breath for 10 years. Perfect, she declared. Legally, emotionally, cosmically, 10 out of 10. Frank sat beside her, fingers laced, quiet but observant. The weight of the moment was not lost on him. Rachel, Grace, as Marian had started calling her again, rose from her seat without a word and walked to her grandmother's side. She knelt down, wrapping her arms around Marian's shoulders and burying her face in the wool folds of her cardigan. I don't want anything but you, she whispered. Marian didn't cry, but her hand came up, slow and gentle, cradling the back of Rachel's head. And now, Richard said, rising to his feet, we make it public. He slid a second envelope forward, this one bound for the county registrar, stamped and sealed, irrevocable once filed. He tapped it once, then tucked it into his briefcase like it was a time bomb that had already detonated in the right direction. 2 days later, Marian sat at her kitchen table with a stack of paper beside her. Not legal forms, grants, applications, budgets. I want the nursing scholarships to start this fall, she said to Alice, who was scanning the spreadsheet with raised brows. Marian, this is a lot. Good, she replied. Not enough people take care of caregivers. This house stood because women like my mother, like me, didn't have the luxury of asking for help. I want to change that. Alice tapped the corner of the page. You sure you don't want your name on it? Marian shook her head. Call it the Grace Fund. Let Rachel sign the checks one day. Rachel, overhearing, from the doorway, blinked hard before stepping outside to breathe. That evening, Frank knocked gently on the back porch and handed Marian a folded newspaper. Inside, an article on the scholarship had already gone live, a small piece in the Plain Dealer, tucked between city council squabbles and a recipe for maple-glazed ham. She read it once, then again, then looked up at Frank, who stood quiet with hands in his coat pockets, snow dusting his shoulders. You didn't have to do this, she said, but you helped me remember why I should. Frank glanced away, as if afraid eye contact might split something open. You gave me back more than revenge, Marian. You gave me a place to stand again. There was a long pause, the kind that settles deep into the bones. Thank you, he said finally, low and simple. Marian touched his hand lightly. Number, thank you. Later that night, the final version of the will was uploaded to the Legal Trust Archive. Rachel sat in her room, flipping through the original hard copy one last time. At the very end, Marian had added one handwritten note, separate from the legal language. A single line, scribbled just beneath her signature. Legacy is not what you leave behind, it's who you leave it to. Rachel closed the folder, and for the first time in years, she slept without a single bad dream. Snow whispered against the windows like an old lullaby. Inside Marian's home, the lights were low and warm. The dining table was modestly set this time. No formality, no performance, just 4 places, no placeholders, no ghosts. Roast chicken steamed gently on a white ceramic platter. The potatoes were golden and crisp. The green beans still snapped when you bit them. And Alice had brought her infamous pecan pie with a lattice top so perfect it could have been sculpted. The smell alone could stop time. Soft jazz drifted from the record player in the corner. Billie Holiday, faint and timeless. Marian moved slowly but with ease, refilling glasses with cider, smoothing the napkin. She wore a navy sweater and a delicate string of pearls. Her eyes were clear, her smile gentle. Frank sat at her right, carving the chicken with careful strokes. He'd worn a collared shirt, ironed just slightly, sleeves rolled to his elbows like always. Rachel, Grace, sat to Marian's left, laughing as Alice tried to argue that pecan pie was underrated because people were intimidated by nuts. Laughter spilled through the room, easy and unforced. Rachel leaned her chin on her hand, watching them all. You know, she said softly now, this is the family we deserved. There was no need to say who wasn't there. No place had been set for him, no chair waited, just in case. No wreath hung on a door he could knock on. Marian smiled, sipping her tea. Yes, she said, by choice, not blood. Alice raised her glass in agreement. To the ones who show up, not because they have to, but because they know what love looks like. Frank lifted his too. To the ones who stay. They clinked glasses. No speeches, no declarations, just the hum of peace settling into old bones. Later, as candles burned lower and plates were pushed aside, Marian sat back in her chair, eyes drifting to the flickering centerpiece. The wax ran in rivulets, glowing against the tablecloth like fire frozen in motion. The warmth in the room wasn't just from the heat or the food, it was something else. She looked around, at Grace, dozing softly now with her head against Alice's shoulder, at Frank, rinsing plates in the sink without being asked, at the ornaments still dangling from the tree in the corner. Small, mismatched, handmade. This wasn't the loud, glittering legacy Eric had imagined when he thought of inheritance. It was better. It was lasting. She stood slowly, stepping toward the living room. She paused by the window and looked out toward the snowy road. No headlights, no lingering shadows, no one coming. And she was finally okay with that. Frank joined her a moment later, drying his hands on a kitchen towel. You all right? Marian nodded. Yes, I am. They stood in silence, side by side, watching snow dust the world clean again. I kept thinking legacy was what you left behind, she murmured. Money, property, a house, a name. Frank glanced at her. But I see it now, Marian said. Legacy is who you leave it with, the ones who don't just take it, but carry it. She reached into her sweater pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. This is for you, she said. Frank blinked. What? She opened it. Inside sat a simple brass key, aged and smooth from use. To the back shed, she said. It's yours. Fix it up. Paint it. Turn it into something that matters. It's not a lot, but... Frank swallowed. It's everything. Behind them, Grace stirred on the couch and murmured something in her sleep. Alice chuckled, curling a blanket over her. The room breathed like a heart, soft and steady. Marian placed the key in Frank's hand and closed his fingers around it. Then, turning back to the window, she whispered, mostly to herself, but loud enough for the past to hear. He said I belonged in a dumpster. I left him in the cold, and built my legacy with those who treated me like treasure.